Hello, I'm Otto Penzler. I'm in the Mysterious Bookshop in Manhattan. This is my office, and we're here for our weekly talk about collecting mystery fiction, collecting first editions. And today, I'd like to talk about a great mystery writer, Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is not generally thought of as a mystery writer, but in fact, almost all of his novels have elements of crime, murder, suspense, kidnapping, uh, criminality of every kind. He wrote an important short story, called Hunted Down. It appeared in a New York newspaper in 1859 in three installments, and then was published in a British newspaper the following year in 1860. It was then put into book form, and since it's Dickens, you would assume that the first book appearance would be in England, but it's not. The first book appearance was published by Bernard Tauchnitz in Leipzig, Germany. And I have a couple of copies of that book. Now, one of the reasons that this book is so collected, I mean, apart from being Dickens, is that it's a Queen's Quorum title. Now, you might say, what's Queen's Quorum? First, let me show you the title page. There it is, Leipzig, 1860. It wasn't published in England in book form until 1870, 10 years later, which is remarkable. So, but this title, because of its importance as a short story, appears in as number 4 in Queen's Quorum. I'll show you one more copy. This one is a little less desirable. It's got a stain on the corner, and it's been rebound. They've both been rebound, but this one is a contemporary binding in really good condition, and this one has some beat up parts to it, so it's quite a bit less. This one's $350, and I think this is $250 or $275. So Queen's Quorum was a book put together by Ellery Queen, actually half of the Ellery Queen collaboration, Frederick Dannay, who was, in addition to writing the mystery stories, was a great scholar in the world of mystery fiction, and wrote a bibliography called The Detective Short Story, in which he listed all of the mystery short story collections that he could find. And he also wrote Queen's Quorum, which listed the 106 most important short story collections in the history of mystery fiction up to the time that he wrote the book, which is around 1950. That list was later expanded to 125, and it is a list that people collect avidly. It's actually one of the first things that when I started collecting was the Queen's Quorum list. So that's a very important book and quite a scarce book, because Tauchnitz did not allow their books to come into. They were in the English language, but they were not allowed into the United States or England. It was a special copyright deal that they made, and were very, very successful for many, many decades, publishing English books and American books in the English language, but only for the European continent. And not too many survived, because they were always published in paper bindings very inexpensively, and they didn't survive. Very, very many of them did not survive. I also have a copy here of The Haunted Man, which has been rebound in a very handsome half leather binding. And this is one of Dickens' very famous Christmas books. So it's more of a ghost story than it is. But there's the title page. And I have it because it's not really a mystery, but it's close enough that I liked having it. His greatest contribution to the mystery genre was Bleak House. which was published in 1852 and 1853. At that time, most of Dickens' works appeared in weekly paper, like a magazine, but it was really just a part of a book. And it was fairly inexpensive, and people would buy it. And it was done in 20 parts, 20 in parts in 19 generally. The last two issues were issued together. And so if you read a catalog description and it says Dickens in parts, that's what it means. It's those paper editions of that novel, and then almost immediately they became available as hardcover books. And Bleak House was issued in that format, 1852 and 53, and it's important because it was the first important use of a policeman in a novel. He created Inspector Bucket for Bleak House, and as a result, other writers such as Wilkie Collins and other writers in the Victorian era started using mystery stories and police detectives as their primary characters or major characters. What I think in a way Dickens has become even more famous for is The Mystery of Edwin Drood. This is an edition. It's not a first edition. It's a beautiful edition, but it's in terrible shape. The binding has broken, and it's really just a terrible mess. But it's got engraved plates in it. There's a portrait of Dickens. I don't have a first edition to show you because they tend to sell pretty quickly if I do have them, because they're very collected. Now, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, this is 1876. But Mystery of Edwin Drood was published first in 1870. It's become one of the great mysteries of all time because while he was writing it, 6 of those weekly parts that I was just talking about were published, and then he died. And everyone thinks, well, all scholars and people who read Victorian fiction and mystery fiction believes that this could have been perhaps the greatest detective novel ever. But nobody will ever know because he died without leaving notes about the way he saw the book going. However, just because Dickens died didn't mean that there wasn't going to be a conclusion to the book. Other writers, other novelists took it on themselves to continue the book, and they added their own endings. Here's an example of one. How this book survived in this condition, in these fragile wrappers, all these years is another mystery to me. You wouldn't think that it could possibly have survived. This is John Jasper's Gatehouse, a sequel to the unfinished novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. This is 1931. This is titled The Murder of Edwin Drood. Not The Mystery of Edwin Drood, The Murder of Edwin Drood. And a lot of people, when they examine what Dickens wrote, aren't sure that there was going to be a murder. But this was 1920, and this writer took it on himself to assume that Edwin Drood had been murdered. In the 6 parts that exist, Drood disappeared. Did not necessarily mean that he was killed. This one is titled The Cloven Foot. And it's 1880. No. 1870. Almost immediately. This is the subtitle here is an adaptation of the English novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. So this guy was writing this book, as Dickens was writing The Mystery of Edwin Drood. He was reading those weekly parts and writing his own book called The Cloven Foot. And here, another very early book, Watched by the Dead, and in a different binding, Watched by the Dead. It was issued at the same time in boards and in cloth. And this is quite a scarce book. And the frontispiece, or the illustration here in the cloth-bound book, is the same as the illustration that was used on the copy in boards. And this is a continuation. This is 1887. It's an early book. So all these writers had their own solution to what happens. Now, the writer who exceeded everybody was Rupert Holmes, who wrote a Broadway musical called The Mystery of Edwin Drood. And Rupert Holmes, who is famous for having written the Pina Colada song, the title of which is really Escape, not the Pina Colada song, but that's what he's known for, and has written many other songs, some quite beautiful, wrote this Broadway show. It first was Shakespeare in the Park, and then was on Broadway, where it was a tremendous success, and is still being played all around the country on a regular basis. But what Rupert did is he had a trick ending, which was everything stopped, and he said, okay, who killed Edwin Drood? And the stage manager would point to each of the 13 characters that were on stage, and the audience applauded for the person that they thought had committed the murder. And Rupert Holmes had a different solution for each one of those characters. After a while, the show ran for quite a long time. One of the characters was played by Cleo Lane, who just had a wonderful voice and a great presence on Broadway. And the audience got a little bit more sophisticated as time went by, and she was always picked as the person because they wanted to hear her sing the solution. So the one last thing I'll just show you, I want to show you the parts that we were talking about for Bleak House. This is in a book that I wrote called, it's kind of a biblio-memoir, where I write about how 20 different books became part of my collection. And we have full color illustrations in that book. And there's Bleak House, that was in parts, that was part of my collection. This book, by the way, has sold out its third printing, but we are planning a fourth printing someday down the road. So if you want to pre-order, feel free, and we'll keep you on record. So there's Charles Dickens, great mystery writer.